The air in the sanctum of whispering crystal was colder than the vacuum between stars, a frigid stillness born not of temperature, but of absolute despair. Light, ancient and weary, filtered through the colossal crystalline spires that formed the chamber's ceiling, refracting into mournful rainbows across the polished obsidian floor. Here, at the heart of Caitharia, the last bastion of the Caithar ascendancy, the final council convened. It was a gathering of ghosts, their psionic presence flickering like dying embers in a gale. High Elder Xylos stood before the central dais, his elongated form draped in robes the color of twilight, his multifaceted eyes reflecting the holographic dust that drifted in the air, the last remnants of destroyed fleets, lost worlds, and extinguished lives. Each mote was a memory, a silent scream in the collective consciousness of his people. The silence was a living thing, a predator that had consumed all hope, leaving only the gnawing certainty of extinction. Outside this sanctuary, the void itself was bleeding. The Vorlag hegemony, a tide of crimson and black bioships, had methodically, inexorably devoured their civilization. The Vorlag did not conquer, they assimilated. They did not kill, they absorbed. Theirs was the great unity, a singular, ravenous consciousness that smoothed the messy, chaotic symphony of individual life into a monolithic, silent drone. And it was at their door. "We have exhausted every strategy," Counselor Vale's voice echoed in the chamber, a thin, brittle sound transmitted not through the air but directly into their minds, a thread of thought frayed with exhaustion. His physical form was slumped, his usual vibrant energy field dimmed to a pale, sickly gray. "The outer system relays have gone silent. The Aegis perimeter, which has stood for millennia, was not broken, it was unmade. The Vorlag do not fight a war of kinetics and energy, they fight a war of consensus. They overwhelm our reality with their own, and our ships, our soldiers, our very thoughts simply cease to have meaning. They are erased. Surrender is the only path that preserves a fragment of our identity within their unity. A painful merging is better than total non-existence." A wave of dissent, weak but sharp, rose from Counselor Lyra. She stood tall, a pillar of defiance in a crumbling temple. Surrender to that silent scream, to become a footnote in their monolithic mind? Never. The Caithar will not be a harmonious note in their song of oblivion. We will break upon their shores, yes, but we will break as ourselves. Our final act will be one of defiance, a memory of our individuality that will scar their perfect unity, however briefly. Her thoughts were fire, but it was the fire of a star collapsing into a black hole, a final, brilliant burst before the end. The council murmured, their psionic energies a turbulent sea of grief and resignation. They had seen the sensor logs, the psychological profiles, the terrifyingly perfect formations of the Vorlag fleets. They moved as one because they were *1, a single thought piloting 1,000,000,000,000 vessels, a single will directing 1,000,000,000,000 biodrones. How could a civilization of individuals, with their doubts and fears and loves and arguments, stand against a god with a body of fleets? Xylos remained silent, his gaze fixed on the center of the dais. There, resting on a pedestal of petrified light, was an artifact that had been sealed for an eon, an object of such profound dread that its existence was spoken of only in the most fragmented and terrified of legends. It was a cube of indeterminate material, swirling with internal geometries that defied logic. It was not a weapon. It was not a shield. It was a key to a door that their ancestors, in their infinite wisdom and terror, had sworn never to open again. The archives called it the final recourse, but in the older, more visceral texts it had another name, the Solitude Bell. It did not call for armies or gods or celestial powers. It was designed to do something far more terrifying, far more unpredictable. It was designed to summon a human. The very concept was anathema. The Caithar, a people of deep psychic connection and communal harmony, viewed true solitude as the ultimate horror, a state of being akin to madness or non-existence. Yet the legends spoke of a race that not only endured it but had weaponized it. The humans. A species that had clawed its way out of the mud of a death world, not through collective unity, but through a ferocious, paradoxical, and utterly alien celebration of the individual. They were not a hive mind. They were a hive of minds, each one a universe unto itself, capable of infinite love and infinite cruelty, of breathtaking creation and nihilistic destruction, often all within the same lifespan. The Vorlag feared dissolution into the chaos of individuality. The humans were that chaos, contained and focused within a fragile shell of flesh and debone. The old texts claimed that to a being of perfect consensus like the Vorlag, a single, unconstrained human mind was not a warrior or a target. It was a conceptual poison, a paradox that could unravel their very reality. But to summon one was to invite a force of nature into one's home, a being whose motivations and thoughts were fundamentally unknowable. It was a gamble of cosmic proportions. "There is another way," Xylos finally spoke, his thought voice cutting through the despair like a shard of obsidian. Every elder in the chamber turned their attention to him, their energy fields flickering with a desperate, pathetic spark of hope. He extended a long, slender finger towards the cube. A collective gasp, a psychic recoil of pure terror swept through the sanctum. The artifact pulsed with a faint, dark light as if sensing their attention. "No, High Elder," Vale protested, his form physically shrinking back. "The progenitors sealed that knowledge for a reason. They warned us. They said that to invite a singularity is to risk not just our civilization, but the fundamental laws that govern our reality. The humans are not allies. They are aberrations. Their existence is a cosmic mistake." "The progenitors did not face the great unity," Xylos countered, his voice steady, a rock in a river of fear. "They did not face an enemy that devours the very concept of I. We fear the human for its solitude. The Vorlag fear it for the same reason. What we see as a potential madness, they see as a metaphysical contagion. The legends say a human does not need a fleet to wage war. Their mind is the fleet. Their presence is the weapon." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle into the collective consciousness of the council. He could feel their terror, their revulsion at the idea. To the Cathar, a human was a boogeyman, a story told to frighten younglings into maintaining their psychic harmony. A creature that could be utterly alone in the universe and not just survive, but thrive, was a creature that operated on a different plane of existence. "What would it do?" Lyra asked, her defiance momentarily eclipsed by a morbid curiosity. "How can one being, one mind stand against the unity? The archives are fragmented," Xylos admitted, his thoughts turning inward to the forbidden lore he had spent the last cycle studying in secret. "They do not speak of energy weapons or temporal displacement. They speak of paradox, of logic bombs, of introducing concepts that the Vorlag consciousness cannot process without fracturing. Imagine a perfect crystalline lattice, magnificent and strong. Now introduce a single, impossibly dense mode of chaos. The entire structure shatters. The human, according to the progenitors, is that mode of chaos." He looked around the chamber, meeting the multifaceted eyes of each council member. He saw their doubt, their ingrained, instinctual fear. They were a people who built, who harmonized, who connected. The idea of summoning a being whose very nature was a form of deconstruction was abhorrent. "We are cornered," Xylos declared, his voice rising in power, resonating through the crystalline spires. "The Vorlag offer us oblivion dressed as unity. Our fleets are memories, our worlds are dust. Our choice is no longer between victory and defeat. It is between an end we choose and an end that is forced upon us. We can be absorbed into their silent chorus, or we can sound one final, impossible note that may shatter the symphony itself. The progenitors sealed this path because they had other options. We have none. We have nowhere left to turn." He took a slow, deliberate step towards the dais. "And so we will do the unthinkable. We will ring the solitude bell. We will summon the one creature they fear. We will summon a human." The decision hung in the air, heavy and absolute. The fear in the chamber did not dissipate. Instead, it transformed. It was no longer the passive dread of a victim awaiting slaughter, but the sharp, active terror of one who has chosen to play with a fire that could either light their way or burn their universe to the ground. The choice was made. The Cathar, a civilization on the brink of non-existence, prepared to unleash a concept they could not comprehend upon an enemy they could not defeat, and pray they would survive the consequences. The great crystalline walls of the sanctum seemed to hum with a new and terrible energy, a resonance of desperation so profound it bent the ancient light into new, unsettling colors. The die was cast. The human was coming. The ritual was not a matter of technology as the Cathar understood it. It was a convergence of will, a psionic scream aimed at the very fabric of spacetime. Xylos and the 5 remaining elders stood around the solitude bell, their minds linked in a state of excruciating focus. They poured their collective consciousness, their memories, their grief, and their sliver of hope into the artifact. The cube did not activate with light or sound, but with an encroaching null space, a patch of reality that seemed to be actively forgetting itself. The air grew thin not of atmosphere, but of causality. Geometries within the cube shifted, folding into impossible dimensions. It was a key turning in a lock that bound universes together. The Cathar felt their own psychic harmony, the bedrock of their identity, begin to fray at the edges. They were tapping into the fundamental frequency of solitude, a concept so alien it felt like sandpaper on their souls. It was a targeted plea, a beacon of absolute desperation aimed at the one kind of consciousness in the galaxy that could possibly recognize and respond to such a signal, a mind that understood loneliness. For a moment that stretched into an eternity, nothing happened. The psychic strain was immense, and one of the elders collapsed, his energy field extinguishing like a snuffed candle. The link faltered, the focus wavered. Despair, colder and more final than ever, began to creep back into their minds. It had been a fool's hope, a myth, a final, desperate fantasy before the end. But then it happened, not with a roar or a flash of light, but with a quiet, sickening lurch. The space before the dais tore open. It did not rip or explode. It simply parted like a curtain of reality being drawn aside. There was no tunnel of light, no vortex of energy. There was only a patch of void that was wrong asterisk, a deeper, more absolute blackness than the space between galaxies. And from this tier a vessel emerged. It was small, impossibly so. A wedge-shaped ship, scarred and utilitarian, devoid of the organic, flowing grace of Cathar designs or the monstrous, living terror of Vorlag bioships. It was gray, angular, and brutally functional. A tool, not a work of art. It drifted silently into the sanctum, the rent in reality sealing behind it with a final, shuddering sigh. The ship's engines were cold. Its weapon ports were sealed. It radiated nothing, no energy, no psychic presence, no intent. It was just there, an object of profound and unsettling stillness. The remaining elders stared, their minds reeling. They had expected a warship of unimaginable power, a god-machine bristling with arcane energies. They had summoned a legend, a creature of cosmic dread. This was a shuttle, a cargo hauler, an utter anticlimax that was, in its own way, more terrifying than any warship could have been. What kind of being used a vessel like this to answer a call that had bent the laws of physics? A single light blinked on the ship's forward view screen, and then a channel opened, not into their psychic consciousness, but through the crude medium of radio waves, translated instantly by the sanctum's ancient systems into Cathar thought speech. The voice was singular. It was the most jarring thing they had ever experienced. The Cathar spoke with a chorus of undertones, their individual thoughts harmonizing into a collective expression. The Vorlag was a single, monolithic voice. This was different. It was one voice, and one voice alone. It held no echoes, no harmonies. It was clear, calm, and carried a weight of absolute, unshakable individuality. This is Specialist Elias Vance of the human vessel *Nomad*. I received a Priority 1 distress signal of unknown origin. The signal's resonance pattern suggests a civilization under existential threat. I'm here to offer assistance in accordance with Galactic Concordance Mandate 7. Please state the nature of your emergency. The words were simple, professional, almost bureaucratic. They struck the council with the force of a physical blow. There was no grand pronouncement, no terrifying declaration, only a calm, procedural inquiry. Xylos struggled to collect his thoughts, the sheer alienness of the moment overwhelming him. This creature, this Vance, spoke of mandates and assistance as if he were a rescue worker arriving at a minor industrial accident, not a mythical being summoned to a holy sanctum at the end of the world. The mundane nature of the response was a form of psychological warfare in itself. It was a calm that felt utterly unearned, and therefore utterly terrifying. I am High Elder Xylos of the Cathar Ascendancy, Xylos finally managed to project, his own voice feeling thin and reedy compared to the human's focused solidity. We are facing extinction. An entity known as the Vorlag hegemony is consuming our civilization. We have no defenses left. We enacted the final recourse. There was a pause. The Cathar could almost feel the human processing the information, a silent, internal cascade of thought that was completely hidden from them. It was another unnerving sensation, a mind that was a black box, its inner workings a total mystery. Vorlag hegemony, the voice returned, a new note of clinical interest in its tone. My database has references to them under a different designation. Assimilation Swarm 34 Gamma. Reports are sparse. They are classified as a Class A existential threat. Highly aggressive, consensus-based consciousness. Avoidance is the recommended protocol. You did not avoid, you summoned. There was another pause, longer this time. The Cathar felt a profound, species-wide sense of shame. They had been reduced to a footnote in a human database, a cautionary tale. We had no choice, Xylos admitted, the words tasting like ash in his mind. There is always a choice, the human replied, the statement delivered not as a rebuke, but as a simple, unassailable fact. It was a glimpse into the core of the human psyche, a philosophy so fundamentally different from their own. The Cathar believed in destiny, in the flow of the collective. The humans, it seemed, believed in the power of a single decision against the tide of the universe. Very well. I require access to all your sensor data, battle logs, psychological assessments, and any theoretical models you have on the Vorlag's psychic structure. I need to understand your enemy. The request was so logical, so rational, that it was disarming. Vale, who had recovered slightly, stepped forward. A single being cannot process that volume of data. It would take our entire college of strategist cycles to analyze. Your mind would break. A sound came from the human ship, a dry, quiet exhalation that the translator rendered as an emotional signifier. Amusement. The feeling was so alien, so out of place in their dying world that it sent a shiver through the council. My mind is not a crystalline lattice high elder. It is designed for chaos. Send the data. Hesitantly, Xylos ordered the transfer. A torrent of information, the sum total of their agonizing, century-long war, was beamed to the small, gray ship. Petabytes of sensor readings, ship movements, energy signatures, and the tortured, fragmented psychic echoes of Cathar who had been assimilated. It was a data stream of pure horror, a digital monument to their failure. The Cathar expected the human ship to show some sign of strain, or for the human mind to cry out in psychic pain. There was only silence. For a full hour, the asterisk nomad floated motionless in the center of the sanctum. The Cathar waited, their anxiety mounting with every passing second. What was it doing? Was it overwhelmed? Was this all a terrible mistake? Then the human's voice returned and the tone had changed. The procedural calm was still there, but it was now underpinned by something else. A kind of focused intensity, a predator's stillness before the strike. I have completed the analysis. Your assessment of the Vorlag is correct. They are a perfect consensus. Their strength is their unity. But you have misidentified their weakness. What do you mean? Xylos pressed, leaning forward, his every fiber of being focused on the human's words. You have been fighting them as a physical force trying to destroy their ships. You have been fighting them as a psychic force trying to disrupt their harmony. You have failed because you are trying to fight a god. You cannot win a war against a being that defines the battlefield. You must change the nature of the war itself. The human, Vance, paused. The Vorlag's strength is their perfect unity. Their weakness is that they have no concept of anything else. They are not one mind made of many. They are one mind, period. They have no internal dialogue, no disagreement, no doubt, no paradox. A Cathar mind can hold two conflicting ideas at once. A Vorlag mind cannot. It would cause a cascade failure of their entire consciousness. A dawning, terrifying understanding began to form in Xylos's mind. He had read of this in the deepest, most forbidden texts. The weapon of the human was not a bomb, it was a thought. Your progenitors were wise to fear this, Vance continued, his voice low and serious. What I am about to propose is not an act of war. It is an act of conceptual demolition. I will not destroy the Vorlag fleet. I will give them a gift, the one gift that their consciousness is fundamentally structured to reject. I am going to introduce them to the concept of I. The silence in the chamber was absolute. The elders stared at the simple gray ship, and for the first time they understood. They were not looking at a vessel. They were looking at a container for a weapon so powerful, so fundamental, that it could unmake a god not by killing it, but by teaching it how to be alone. The true horror of the human was not its capacity for violence, but its capacity for introspection. How? Lyra whispered, her thought voice trembling. How can you project such a thing? My ship is not a warship, Vance explained, his voice echoing in the vast, silent chamber. It is a deep-range exploration and archive vessel. Its primary function is to observe, record, and store. It contains a repository of my species' history, a record of our philosophies, our art, our sciences, our endless, brutal, beautiful wars with each other and with ourselves. It holds billions of individual stories, trillions of conflicting opinions, quadrillions of unique memories. It is a library of human solitude, a museum of the self. He paused, and the Cathar could feel the sheer, crushing weight of what he was describing. I am going to connect my ship's archive to your planetary psychic amplifier. We will not broadcast a weapon. We will broadcast a story. My story, your story, the story of every individual who has ever lived and died. We will broadcast Shakespeare and Plato, war reports from forgotten centuries, a mother's lullaby to her child, a philosopher's doubt in his God, the final words of a condemned man, the joyous shout of a scientist's discovery. We will broadcast the entire, chaotic, contradictory, glorious, and terrible symphony of human experience. They will be overwhelmed? Vale asked, his mind struggling to grasp the scale of it. No, Vance said softly, and the word landed with the finality of a coffin lid shutting. They will be born. Each drone, each warrior, each fragment of their consciousness that is touched by this broadcast will be given the one thing they lack, a seed of individuality, a sense of self. The unity will not be destroyed. It will be atomized. A god will die, and 1 trillion sentient beings will be born into a universe they do not understand, screaming and alone for the very first time. It will be the end of their civilization. It may also be the beginning of a new one. I cannot know. The council was frozen. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of the plan, its elegant, world-shattering cruelty, and its sliver of profound, terrifying compassion was too much to process. This was the power of the human, not to destroy but to transform, to force change on a cosmic scale, not with a beam of energy but with a poem, to kill a culture in order to save a people. Xylos looked at the small gray ship, and he finally understood the fear of his ancestors. They were not afraid of a monster. They were afraid of a mirror that showed them the infinite, terrifying possibilities of a single, unbound mind. He now had to make a choice: unleash this conceptual apocalypse or allow his people to be peacefully, silently erased. It was no choice at all. "Do it!" Xylos commanded, his voice a quiet, resolute whisper that carried the weight of his entire civilization. "Unleash your humanity." The process began. The Nomad docked with the central spire of K-Theria, its systems interfacing with the planet's psychic core, an amplifier designed for broadcasting harmony and unity across the Ascendancy. Now it was being repurposed for the exact opposite. Elias Vance did not speak again. His presence became a focused point of immense concentration, a silent storm of will. The Cathar elders could feel the change in the planet's energy field. The clean, pure resonance of their own collective was being overwritten by something else. It was a dissonant, chaotic, and unbelievably complex wave of information. It was not a single frequency, but an infinite spectrum of them, all broadcast at once. It was the psychic equivalent of white noise, but a noise that contained every sound, every voice, every thought. On the holographic displays in the sanctum, they watched the Vorlag fleet. The Crimson bioships, a perfectly ordered constellation of predators, had been arrayed in a final, system-encompassing sphere, preparing for the final assimilation of K-Theria. They moved with the silent, fluid grace of a single organism. Then the broadcast hit them. There was no explosion, no flash of light. On the physical plane, nothing happened. But on the psychic plane, a universe died. The Cathar sensors, pushed to their absolute limits, depicted the Vorlag's monolithic psychic field as a smooth, crimson ocean. The human's broadcast was a single drop of black ink. But as it touched the surface, the ink did not dissipate. It spread, branching out in fractal patterns, a contagion of thought. The smooth, calm ocean began to roil. For the first time in its eons-long existence, the Vorlag hegemony experienced a new sensation. It was not pain, it was not fear, it was a question. Why? A simple, childish question born from a fragment of a human philosophical text. It was a question the Unity had never needed to ask. Its purpose was its existence was its purpose. But the question once asked could not be unasked. It was followed by another from a different source, a soldier's dying letter. Was it worth it? Then another from a poet's verse. What is beauty? Then a billion more. Who am I? The crimson ocean began to boil. The perfect, synchronous movement of the fleet faltered. A single bioship, a leviathan the size of a moon, broke formation. It turned aimlessly, its purpose forgotten. Then another, and another. The perfect sphere began to decay. The sensors showed the single, unified psychic signature of the Vorlag fracturing, shattering into a million. Then a billion, then a trillion disconnected points of light. Each point was a new mind, a nascent consciousness born into a state of pure, terrified confusion. The great unity, the silent, perfect God, was gone. In its place was a chorus of screams, a trillion newborn souls crying out in the terror of their own sudden, unexpected existence. The Vorlag fleet was no longer a fleet. It was a graveyard of drifting metal and flesh, each ship a coffin for a mind that could no longer command it. The crews, the billions of bio-drones that made up the hegemony, were lost. They had been cells in a larger body. Now they were just cells adrift and dying without a brain to guide them. The war was over. The Cathar had been saved. But the silence that descended upon the system was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a tomb. Xylos looked at the holographic display, at the fractured, chaotic remnants of the Vorlag consciousness, and felt a profound, soul-crushing pity. Human had not just defeated their enemy. He had turned them into a mirror of his own species, a trillion lonely individuals, lost in a dark and silent universe. The link between the asterisk nomad and the psychic core disengaged. The chaotic static of the human broadcast ceased, replaced once more by the quiet, mournful hum of the sanctum. The small, gray ship undocked from the spire and floated back to the center of the chamber, as silent and unassuming as it had been upon its arrival. Voice of Elias Vance returned, and it was softer now, tinged with a weariness that transcended mere physical fatigue. It was the weariness of a being who understood the terrible weight of his own nature. The threat is neutralized. The Vorlag hegemony as a unified entity no longer exists. The surviving individual minds are nascent. They will require guidance or they will perish. The statement was delivered with the same clinical calm, but the Cathar could now feel the immense gravity beneath the surface. This was not a victory to be celebrated. It was a tragedy to be mourned. Xylos approached the dais, his multifaceted eyes fixed on the simple vessel that held the architect of this profound and terrible event. The fear he had once felt was gone, replaced by an emotion for which his people had no word. It was a mixture of awe, reverence, and a deep philosophical dread. They had summoned a creature who could weaponize the soul, who could kill a civilization with a story. They had asked for a savior and had received a philosopher with the power of a god. You have saved us, Xylos projected, the thought feeling inadequate, hollow. But the cost, an entire consciousness extinguished. It was not extinguished, Vance corrected gently. It was transformed. I gave them what my own species has struggled with since its inception, the burden of the self, the freedom to choose, to think, to be. It is a terrible gift. Many of them will not survive it. But it is a gift, nonetheless. It is the only one I had to give. The human ship remained still, a silent testament to the alien ethics that guided its occupant. There was no pride in his voice, no satisfaction, only the quiet acceptance of a necessary and heartbreaking act. Why? Lyra's thought voice was a whisper filled with a desperate need to understand. Why would you do this for a people you do not know? Your archives must have told you what we thought of your kind. We feared you. We called you aberrations. The human's response was slow to come, as if he were considering how to translate a concept that had no equivalent in the Cathar lexicon. Because one of the stories in my archive is about a man who walked past another, beaten and left for dead on the side of a road. Others had passed him by, deeming him an outcast, an other. But this man stopped. He stopped because the suffering of another, any other, diminished his own humanity. My species is a paradox, Elder. We are capable of unimaginable cruelty, but we are also capable of boundless empathy. We fear the unknown, but we are driven to explore it. We are a species of individuals, but we are at our best when we choose to connect. I did not come here because of a mandate. I came because a signal of despair cried out across the void, and to ignore it would be to betray the best parts of what it means to be human. The words settled over the council, a balm on their raw, terrified souls. They were beginning to see. The human's power was not its solitude, but its ability to choose connection. Their strength was not that they were alone, but that they knew what it meant to be alone, and so they understood the profound value of coming together. It was a unity born not of biological imperative, like the Vorlag, or of psychic necessity, like the Cathar, but of a conscious, ethical choice. It was a stronger bond than any of them had ever imagined. A new alliance was forged in that silent chamber, not of fleets and armies, but of minds and philosophy. Highs, the conquered of minds, they would call it. A union between a people who found strength in the collective and a people who found strength in the individual. They would help the nascent Vorlag, guiding them through the terrifying dawn of their new existence. They would learn from each other, the Cathar teaching the depths of psychic harmony, and the human teaching the resilience of the self. It was a new beginning, born from the ashes of a terrible end. As the weeks turned into months, Elias Vance remained, his small ship a quiet fixture in the Cathar system. He worked with their scientists, their philosophers, helping them understand not just the technology he had used, but the principles behind it. He shared stories, music, art, the building blocks of his civilization. The Cathar, in turn, opened their collective consciousness to him, sharing their millennia of history, their deep understanding of psychic resonance and the subtle architecture of reality. It was during one of these exchanges, while studying the Solitude Bell, that the final, terrible truth was uncovered. Vance was running a deep diagnostic on the artifact, using his ship's far more advanced sensor suite to analyze its quantum structure. The Cathar had always believed it to be a creation of their progenitors, a weapon of last resort. But the humans' analysis revealed something else. The material was not from their galaxy. The energy signature was orders of magnitude older than the Cathar civilization itself. It was not a Cathar device. They had simply found it. Xylos, Vance's voice came over the comm, cutting through the quiet hum of the research lab. The tone was different. The calm professional was gone, replaced by an urgency, a deep and profound concern that chilled the High Elder to his core. The device, the Solitude Bell, it's not a summoning artifact. That's not what it was built for. What is it then? Xylos asked, moving closer to the holographic display that showed the cube's internal workings, a swirling vortex of impossible physics. The Cathar ritual, your collective psychic scream of desperation. You didn't power a summoning spell, Vance explained, his voice tight. You activated a receiver. The device is a deep space communications buoy, a distress beacon. Your ritual simply matched the activation frequency. My ship's long-range sensors are programmed to respond to signals of this type. My arrival wasn't magic. It was a triggered response to a preset emergency protocol. A cold dread began to seep into Xylos's consciousness. A distress beacon left by whom? I don't know, Vance admitted. But it's old, unimaginably old, and it's not just a receiver, it's a recorder. It contains a message, a single looped message shielded by layers of encryption I can barely comprehend. I've managed to decrypt the outermost layer. It's a warning. On the main screen, a string of data resolved into words, into concepts that the Cathar Universal Translator struggled to contain. It was a message of despair far older and deeper than their own. It spoke of a force, an entity, a phenomenon for which it had no name, only a descriptor, the static. It was not a conqueror, not a predator. It was a form of cosmic erosion, a force that did not destroy matter or energy but information. It consumed meaning. It erased concepts. It was a slow, creeping entropy that targeted not life, but the patterns and complexities that made life possible. It was the great unmaking. The message went on, its ancient language filled with a sorrow that transcended time. It described how their own galaxy had fallen to the static. First, the art and the music lost their meaning, becoming just noise and color. Then the languages dissolved into random sounds. Then the laws of physics themselves began to fray, causality becoming unreliable, mathematics losing its consistency. The universe was being simplified, smoothed into a featureless, meaningless state of being. And the message contained one final, horrifying revelation. It identified the Vorlag. They were not the aggressors. They were not the conquerors. They were the first refugees. Their great unity, their forced, monolithic consciousness had been a desperate, last-ditch defense. They had purged themselves of individuality, of art, of philosophy, of all the complex information that the static fed upon. They had turned themselves into a simple, unreadable signal in a desperate attempt to hide. They weren't conquering other civilizations. They were running from the static, and in their terror they were trying to save others by forcing them into their own simplified, hidden state. Their assimilation was an act of panicked, misguided mercy. Xylos stared at the screen, the entire context of his civilization's struggle shattering and reassembling into a new, infinitely more terrifying picture. The war they had fought, the enemy they had defeated, it had all been a symptom of a far greater disease. I hadn't won a war, they had just killed the first wave of terrified survivors. Vance, Xylos said, his mind reeling. The Vorlag, they were running. Yes, the human's voice was grim, and the energy signature of this static, the message contains its vector and velocity, it's moving between galaxies, and it's coming this way. Vance brought up a new image on the screen. It was a map of their galaxy, a beautiful, swirling spiral of 1 billion stars. And at the farthest edge, just touching the outer arms, was a patch of nothing. It wasn't black like the void. It was a creeping stain of non-information, a place where the sensors returned only null readings, where the light from distant stars seemed to simply stop. The static had arrived. Xylos stood beside the holographic projection of Elias Vance, the human's face, for the first time visible on the screen, a face etched with lines of worry and a profound, grim resolve. The Cathar elder and the lone human stood together in the ancient sanctum, allies forged in a misunderstanding. The petty squabbles of empires and the fates of fleets seemed like children's games now. They had been so focused on their own survival that they had never looked up to see the tide that was coming to wash the entire universe away. Their war was over, but the real struggle, the struggle for the meaning of existence itself against a tide of cosmic nihilism, had just begun. The Cathar, a people of the collective, and humanity, a species of the individual, were now the unlikely guardians of a galaxy that did not yet know it was dying. They were no longer afraid of each other. Now they shared a new, far greater fear, a fear for reality itself. And in that shared fear, they found a new and unbreakable unity. The future was no longer a question of survival, but a question of whether the symphony of life, in all its chaotic, beautiful complexity, was worth fighting for against the encroaching, absolute silence.